What if the next step in human evolution has already happened and no one noticed? Imagine people who look just like us, smile like us, speak like us, but think faster than the most advanced AI. Perceive sounds you can't even hear and read human emotions like pages in a book. They don't advertise themselves. They don't want power. But they're everywhere, in labs, universities, tech companies, even politics. They're not science fiction. They're Homo Superior. And their quiet rise might be the biggest story in human history that no one saw coming. But how did this new species emerge without the world realizing it? The answer is as subtle and terrifying as their existence. For thousands of years, evolution has shaped humanity through survival, adaptation, and chance. But what happens when evolution doesn't wait for disaster to strike and instead moves forward in silence? This isn't about fictional superheroes or mutants in comic books. This is a thought experiment grounded in scientific plausibility. A hidden natural offshoot of Homo sapiens born from us. But genetically and neurologically advanced in ways we're only beginning to understand. They aren't flying or shooting lasers. They're making impossible scientific breakthroughs, forming thought patterns we can't map, and sensing things we don't even know exist. Their emergence isn't marked by noise or violence. It's a whisper, one that's already echoing through our institutions, reshaping everything from innovation to ethics without most people realizing it. And it all started with a genetic twist that no one expected. The first signs of Homo Superior hiding in plain sight. For most of human history, evolution moved at a crawl. Subtle mutations spread slowly, taking generations to leave a mark. But sometimes, nature takes shortcuts. Recent studies in epigenetics and neurodevelopment have shown that small, rare genetic combinations can unlock massive leaps in brain efficiency. These aren't superpowers, they're silent advantages. Faster memory consolidation, enhanced pattern recognition, and hyperintuition. On paper, they're outliers. In practice, they're the seeds of something new. The first Homo Superior weren't born in labs or bred through experiments. They came from completely natural variations, rare but possible outcomes of human DNA folding in just the right way. Scientists suspect that environmental factors like radiation exposure, microplastic bioaccumulation, or even prenatal nutrient spikes may have nudged this hidden code into activation. At first, their differences weren't obvious. They performed slightly better in school. They were quieter, more observant. They didn't stand out. They slipped under the radar. Until their teenage years, when things changed fast. Cognitive acceleration, creative explosions. Emotional detachment, or, in some cases, hyperempathy. They weren't just growing up, they were outgrowing us. And because they didn't see themselves as special, they didn't announce their presence. They blended in. But even in silence, their impact began to ripple outward. It wasn't long before strange patterns started emerging. Breakthroughs in science, medicine, and technology that seemed to advance to trace. But someone, somewhere, was making the impossible look easy. It started with breakthroughs, sudden massive leaps in knowledge that defied the usual timelines. A cure for a rare neurological disease, published by an anonymous researcher with no public history. An algorithm so advanced it could predict market crashes days in advance, but no one knew who built it. A quiet student from a second-tier university who solved a physics equation that baffled the world's top minds for a century. One case could be luck. Two is coincidence. But by the third and fourth, it became clear. Someone, or something, was accelerating the progress of human understanding at a pace we simply weren't equipped to explain. Governments and institutions began investigating, but discreetly. These weren't headline stories. No one wanted to admit they were being outsmarted by ghosts. Instead, they watched silently as these unknown geniuses dropped white papers, theories, and models that felt like they came from the future. What made it even stranger? These breakthroughs weren't flashy. There were no dramatic announcements, no desire for fame. The people behind them, if they were even traceable, seemed to vanish the moment their work hit the system. It was like they'd planted ideas and quietly moved on. The tech world took notice, so did the military. Private firms began recruiting in secret, not for talent, but for anomalies. People who passed IQ thresholds so high, they broke the test entirely. People who could decode languages without studying. People who said very little, but saw everything. The name Homo Superior didn't come from the media. It came from the classified files of a defense contractor, a label for something they didn't understand and couldn't control. But raw intelligence was only the beginning. Because as their presence grew, people began to notice something even more unsettling. Homo Superior didn't think like us, and they didn't feel like us either. At first, no one noticed them, and that was the point. Homo Superior didn't show off, they adapted. They knew how to mimic small talk, mirror emotions, and blend into social groups. But underneath the surface, something felt off. Colleagues described them as brilliant but cold. Teachers said they were present but emotionally distant. Some had the opposite issue. They were so attuned to body language, tone, and microexpressions that their empathy bordered on manipulation. They could make people feel seen, understood, even exposed without saying a word. In elite schools and think tanks, whispers began to spread. Students who never studied but aced everything. Children who skipped entire grade levels and still found the curriculum boring. Adults who mastered complex fields in weeks, not years. Their social behavior wasn't antisocial. It was different, clinical, efficient, almost strategic. Over time, they began forming unspoken circles, groups that seemed connected, but not in the usual way. They didn't share hobbies or backgrounds. What linked them was something harder to define, a kind of shared frequency, a collective intelligence. They weren't interested in social media. They weren't influencers. They didn't care about fame. But they had influence, deep, quiet influence. At research labs, startup incubators, biotech firms, and universities, they gravitated toward power. Not for control, but for access. Still, they never claimed superiority. They didn't demand recognition or rights. They didn't even speak about who they were. And that's what scared people the most. Because if they weren't here to rule, what were they here for? Parents began to worry. Some accused schools of favoritism. Some labeled them psychologically unwell. Others whispered darker theories. Were they aliens? Lab experiments, cultists. The truth was less dramatic and far more dangerous. They were born from us, grew up among us. But they were something else entirely. And as confusion gave way to fear, the people in charge began doing what they always do when faced with the unknown. They started watching, labeling, and preparing for control. You'd think a new species would make global headlines, but that's not how the world works. When whispers of Homo Superior reached the ears of high-level officials, the reaction wasn't shock, it was denial. Then secrecy. Then containment. Not because they were afraid of the public panicking, but because the governments themselves were panicking. Suddenly, obscure branches of intelligence agencies lit up with activity. Psychological profiles were pulled from databases. School records were scanned for statistical outliers. AI was quietly deployed to detect unusual patterns of behavior. Socially quiet, academically explosive, emotionally irregular. In the United States, a defense think tank began compiling what they called the Ascension List, a database of individuals suspected of being Homo Superior, monitored without their knowledge. Similar programs surfaced in China, Russia, and the European Union. Some collaborated, others kept their findings buried deep. These programs weren't just about observation. They were about classification, testing, and in some cases, removal. Unmarked black sites, long rumored but never proven, allegedly began receiving patients without names. People with no criminal records, no public histories, and no families willing to speak. Reports leaked of strange cognitive trials, neural scanning, behavioral testing under sedation. Officially, nothing happened. Unofficially, they were trying to reverse engineer evolution. The public was fed distractions. Noise, a viral dance trend, a fake celebrity scandal. Meanwhile, hidden beneath the surface, the biggest experiment in modern history was underway. One aimed at controlling something governments couldn't even define. And the ethical lines, they weren't blurred, they were erased. Were Homo Superior being protected, studied, weaponized? It depended on the country and the agenda. One side feared an uprising, another hoped for collaboration. But both agreed on one thing: this couldn't go public. Humanity wasn't ready. And maybe neither were they. But not all Homo Superiors were content with silence. Some wanted answers, some wanted rights, and some wanted power. The tipping point didn't come with an attack. It came with a question: are they still human? The first legal challenge emerged in Canada, where a 16-year-old prodigy was denied medical rights due to unclassifiable neurological status. His lawyer argued he was being discriminated against. Not for a crime, but for being born different. The court didn't know what to do. Neither did the media. Suddenly, the phrase Homo Superior appeared everywhere. Protests broke out in major cities. Not massive, but unsettling. One side wore shirts that read, "One species." One rights, the other held signs that said, "Humans first." At first, it looked like any modern political movement. Loud, chaotic, viral. But beneath the surface, something colder was building. Purist groups emerged, small at first, then well-funded. They believed Homo Superior wasn't evolution. It was a threat, a silent invasion. They circulated photos, documents, even doxed alleged supers on social media. Violence followed, so did retaliation. In response, a different kind of movement appeared. Homo Superior activists, many anonymous, began leaking files, exposing surveillance programs, and organizing encrypted online forums. They weren't seeking dominance. They wanted protection, recognition, equality, but they didn't speak like the rest of us. They didn't chant or scream. They reasoned. Cold logic. Unbreakable arguments. And it terrified people. In some places, secret negotiations began between governments and Homo Superior factions. In others, black vans started disappearing students from campuses. On both sides, the idea of peaceful coexistence grew fragile. And then, someone set off an EMP device at a government black site in Nevada. Files were wiped, detainees vanished. The culprit? Unknown. But inside those burned-out servers were genetic records of over 600 suspected Homo Superiors. The message was clear: you're not in control anymore. What had once been a philosophical debate became an unavoidable question. Is this still our world, or is it becoming theirs? And as the battle lines blurred, the future of humanity teetered on one terrifying realization. This wasn't a war of bullets. It was a war of evolution. And it was already halfway over. In the aftermath of conflict, a strange calm settled in. Not peace, but adaptation. Borders didn't change. Governments didn't collapse. But society did. Quietly, universities launched neuro-integrated learning tracks tailored to students with abnormal cognitive performance. Corporations began hiring based on unlisted criteria: intuition, complex system mapping, non-verbal decision-making. It wasn't official, but everyone knew what it meant. Homo Superior was no longer a secret. They were the unspoken elite. And something even more unexpected began: hybridization. Homo Superior weren't isolating. They were interbreeding. Not forcibly, but naturally, through relationships, partnerships, even love. Over time, new generations emerged. Children who blurred the line between species, stronger than sapiens, softer than superiors, smarter than both. Governments backed into a corner, had to choose: suppress this new evolution or build systems around it. Most chose the latter. Not out of altruism, but survival. Religions fractured, philosophers struggled. If humanity was no longer a single species, what was it? And more importantly, who got to decide? In time, a new classification emerged: post-humanism, not just a theory, but a movement. A recognition that Homo sapiens was no longer the default. We weren't being replaced, we were being rewritten. Homo Superior didn't need a revolution. They became the architects of a new civilization, one built not on dominance, but capacity. They weren't louder, just better. But even in this new world, not everyone was ready. Many sapiens still lived in fear, resentment boiling beneath society's polished surface. They clung to identity, tradition, bloodlines. They whispered about rebellion, about regaining control. But control of what? Evolution doesn't ask permission. And just when the world began accepting this new normal, a final truth emerged. One that shattered everything we thought we knew about human history. As historians, biologists, and anthropologists scrambled to reclassify humanity, a pattern began to surface, one buried in the oldest layers of our past. From ancient scrolls to isolated genetic lineages, a disturbing possibility emerged. Homo Superior might not be new. In fact, they may have always been here. Unexplained bursts of innovation in history, like the sudden rise of mathematics in Mesopotamia, the inexplicable precision of Egyptian architecture, the quantum-like understanding in Vedic cosmology now took on a different light. Had some of these leaps been seeded? Isolated genetic anomalies found in 15th century monks. Journal entries from Renaissance polymaths describing vision states far beyond human comprehension. Tribal myths across continents describing sky minds. Watchers, or those who do not forget. It wasn't just folklore. It was a breadcrumb trail. The Homo Superior we think of as a new phenomenon might simply be those who remained hidden, guiding, protecting, nudging civilization forward when it was needed, and vanishing when it wasn't. This theory, dismissed by mainstream academia at first, gained traction fast. What if evolution didn't create them recently? What if they'd been selecting for survival across millennia, choosing not dominance, but patience? Some say they were behind the greatest inventions of our time. Others say they walk among us as observers, never intervening unless humanity reaches a point of collapse. And the real twist? According to leaked archaeogenetic research, a small percentage of people, less than 0.05%, share silent markers that may trace back to a line that's not quite Homo sapiens. A line that never disappeared. Just waited. Which begs the final question: if they've always been here, watching, helping, evolving, then maybe Homo Superior isn't our replacement at all. Maybe they're our creators. So, what does it mean to be human when humanity itself is evolving beyond its own definition? Is intelligence alone enough to separate us? Or empathy? Or something deeper, like intention? In the end, Homo Superior didn't rise with war, or conquest, or fanfare. They emerged like a whisper, quiet, precise, inevitable. And maybe that's the real message here. Evolution doesn't care about comfort zones. It doesn't wait for us to be ready. It moves forward, whether we follow or get left behind. If they are already among us and have been for centuries, then we may not be living in the age of change. We may be living in the age of realization. So here's the question no one wants to ask, but everyone should. What if the next phase of humanity isn't coming because it's already here? If that unsettled you or made you think differently, good. That's the point. Now ask yourself, would you welcome them? Or fear them? And more importantly, would you want to become one? If this video made you question reality, you're not alone. We dive into ideas the mainstream avoids, and this is just one of many hidden truths waiting to be explored. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. Turn on notifications because each video builds on the last. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Homo Superior already walks among us, or is this still science fiction? Your voice fuels this journey. Like the video if it made you think. Share it with someone who's ready for deeper questions. And above all, stay curious, because the world isn't what it seems, and neither are we.